My name is Veronique Dubourgel. I am 61 years old, and I spent 13 years inside Opus Dei between Switzerland and France. I didn't really have any connection to religion. What I was searching for was more existential, something like, what is the purpose of life? Why is there so much injustice in the world? Why is there so much suffering? If there were a God, maybe those things wouldn't exist. Those were the questions that troubled me. I was actually against anything related to Catholicism, especially the Vatican and the Vatican's money. So I didn't have a religion. It was more of a personal search. Later on, I met the man who would become my fiancé, then my husband, and later, my ex-husband. He was a very devout Catholic. He went to Mass every day, and that caught my attention. I kept thinking, but he's so young. He was 25 at the time, 23 when I first met him. So I started going with him from time to time to evening Mass. That's when he suggested I visit a women's cultural center in Geneva, in the old part of the city. He said, "You'll see. The girls there are really nice, you won't feel alone, and when it's cold, at least you'll be in a warm place." I agreed and went. And honestly, the atmosphere was really nice. There was a joyful vibe. The girls laughed, sang, played the guitar. We had cooking classes. It was really lively. I think that was something I was missing at home. A little bit of joy. I thought, this is great. This is exactly what I need. They seemed happy, full of joy and love for life. These girls, who I was having such a great time with, one day invited me on a trip to Rome. I accepted right away, not knowing that this was much more than just a simple trip. On the bus, an older woman sat next to me and didn't stop talking about vocation, about being called, and I kept thinking, what does this woman want from me? She started explaining to me what Opus Dei was, saying that I was searching for answers, and that in her opinion, I had a calling to join Opus Dei. That really took me by surprise. She explained to me that the cultural center I was attending didn't openly say it was connected to Opus Dei, because according to them, nothing officially belongs to Opus Dei, but it was run by people who were already members. But up until then, to me, it was just a place where I took classes, sang, had fun, and met some nice girls. Later, we stayed at what felt like a youth hostel, where they held meditations and masses. And at every one of those moments, whether during the meditations or the masses, the priest kept repeating the same thing. Among you, there are people who have a calling to join Opus Dei. That was repeated over and over again, non-stop. There were also confessionals. I had never been to confession before, but they told me, "Go ahead, you can talk to the priest." So I did, and at the end of the conversation, he told me again, "Veronique, if you'll let me call you that, you have a calling to join Opus Dei." Oh, after creating that joyful environment and trying to convince me with that story about vocation, they were already preparing me for the next step. Even though I wasn't really convinced, one day that same woman told me, "Let's write a letter asking for you to become a member of Opus Dei." This letter had to be sent to the headquarters in Rome, if I'm not mistaken. The problem was I had no idea what to write because, deep down, I didn't even really want to join Opus Dei. I barely knew what it was. The priest, for example, wore a cassock, which I already found strange. On top of that, all the masses were celebrated with the priest facing away from the people, something I had never seen in my life. So I told her I didn't know what to write in the letter. She ended up writing it for me, dictating what I should say. Today, I can't really remember exactly what it said, but basically I was asking to become a member of Opus Dei. I just signed it and dated it. The letter was sent, and that's when everything started to fall apart. From one day to the next, that woman simply stopped talking to me. After I had made the request, I started noticing a change in the behavior of everyone I used to spend time with there, but I still had no idea what was coming. What stuck with me the most from that time was a moment at the Vatican in St. Peter's Square during that trip to Rome. The group was split in two. On one side, the women, on the other, the men, and among them was my fiancé. All of a sudden, the Pope appeared, and right behind him was my fiancé, talking to him. I was really moved seeing that, and I'm sure it showed. That's when a girl next to me said, "When you're part of Opus Dei, you can't show your emotions." I thought, what is this? How does she know I'm in Opus Dei? In reality, everyone already knew. Word had spread quickly that I had Zifli, as they called it, meaning I had asked to join. The cold way that girl shut me down in that moment made me realize I had made a huge mistake. I thought, what kind of mess have I gotten myself into? After that, they took me to a meeting with Álvaro del Portillo, who at the time was the successor of the founder of Opus Dei, José María Escrivá de Balaguer. They handed me a piece of paper and asked me to write down a question for him. Honestly, I don't even remember what I wrote anymore, but in the end, they asked me to ask a question that had nothing to do with what I had written. It was about confession, a topic that, to be honest, I didn't care about at all. He answered in Spanish, and I didn't understand a single word, but I had to sit there smiling and nodding like I understood everything. I thought to myself, this is all such a scam. I found the atmosphere incredibly over the top. The women seemed hysterical, and there was this electric tension in the air. All I heard was, the prelate, the prelate, the father, like he was some kind of divine figure. And I kept thinking, come on, he's just a priest, nothing more. There was this absurd idolization around him. And that's not even mentioning the kind of worship I would later find out they had toward the founder of Opus Dei. His face was everywhere. He was already being treated like a saint long before he was officially canonized. It was as if he had taken the place of Christ and God. It felt like there was nothing else but him. After that really strange trip, I went back home to Switzerland. When I got to the train station, my fiancé was there waiting for me. He already knew I had Zifli too. That's when I found out that he had already been a member of Opus Dei for almost a year, and he had never told me. From that first year until the moment I finally left, I had time to reflect and started to realize what was really going on. The reason they asked me to Zifler, that is, to request to join Opus Dei, was because my ex-husband was already part of the organization. They realized I didn't exactly fit the typical profile of an Opus Dei member, so I imagine they thought this might cause some problems. I guess they figured that if I also became a member, they'd have a way to control me, and that way, I wouldn't get in my husband's way when it came to the activities he was supposed to be involved in inside Opus Dei. I think in that sense, it was a strategic move on their part because, in the end, I really didn't get in my husband's way much, and I ended up following the rules they imposed. There's a period between the time you ask to join and when you officially become a member of Opus Dei. During that time, they teach you to follow a series of rules: praying the rosary, going to Mass every day, doing adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, practicing meditation, reading the Gospel, reading books by the founder of Opus Dei, going to confession regularly, and attending what they call circles. These circles are gatherings for members where they give you some kind of moral or religious lesson on a specific topic. Right from the start, I could tell something was off. They got way too involved in my life, in my privacy, in my thoughts, in my friendships. It was like this: you can't be friends with that person, but you can be friends with this other one. And I would think, but I like this one. I don't even know or like that other one. And they would say, but that one has a vocation for Opus Dei. In other words, they even chose who you could have around you, and that already bothered me a lot. Inside Opus Dei, they say everyone has the same vocation, but there are different ways to live it. That's how it's structured. There are the supernumeraries, people like me who can get married, have kids, work, and live what they consider a normal life outside the Opus Dei centers. Then there are the numeraries, men or women who choose not to get married, who live in the centers and work outside, but all the money they make goes to Opus Dei. And then there are the assistant numeraries, who are women that take care of the cleaning and cooking in the men's and women's centers, always avoiding any contact with the men, since any interaction between male and female members is strictly prohibited. Among the prohibitions, there was even something as simple as holding my husband's hand. We couldn't have any kind of physical affection because that could trigger bad thoughts in the numeraries who had chosen to live in chastity, not as a vow, since there's no formal vow, but as a lifestyle choice. Whenever I had any doubts or felt like something wasn't right, they would tell me, "Stop asking questions, just listen and do what we're telling you. Faith will come." That was their speech. Faith will come. And I would answer, "But I don't have faith." And they would just repeat, "It will come." Oh, day-to-day life inside Opus Dei was ruled by guidelines, prohibitions, and instructions, all aimed at controlling our lives and our thoughts. We couldn't even have a real friendship with another member. We treated each other like brothers and sisters. They said Opus Dei was one big family, but at the same time, I couldn't open up to one of these sisters. I couldn't say, "Look, something about Opus Dei is bothering me," or "I'm not feeling well," or even "I'm feeling discouraged." I couldn't show any of that because according to them, if you're a member of Opus Dei, you have to always be doing great because we were the chosen ones. We had to set an example for the world, show that we were filled with God, and that's why we were supposed to be glowing, happy people all the time. The truth is, you weren't allowed to be yourself, and if you happened to say something you weren't supposed to, they had what they called a fraternal correction. That meant someone would come over and call you out, saying something like, "You said this or that, and that wasn't right," and so on. There was this culture of constantly ratting each other out. It happened all the time. It was constant, something that was always hanging over you. You could never truly be yourself. And the person giving the fraternal correction also had the obligation to report it to the director of the center, just to make sure the job had been done. I personally received several fraternal corrections, but they also asked me to give some, which I ended up refusing because I thought it was unacceptable and it just didn't feel right. One of those situations involved a mother who had lost her baby and was very sad. They asked me to tell her that as a member of Opus Dei, she had no right to be sad. I thought to myself, "You've got to be kidding me. There's no way I'm doing that." And I didn't. The second situation involved a woman who already had 1 or 2 children, but the third one wasn't coming. They asked me to investigate whether she was using some form of birth control because that was strictly forbidden. In Opus Dei, women were expected to keep having children, and since some time had passed since her last one, they started getting suspicious. I refused. I thought, that's none of my business. I'm not going to ask her something like that. And I didn't. Even the way we dressed was controlled. We weren't allowed to wear short sleeves, no low-cut tops, and pants were totally off limits. On the other hand, they expected us to always wear makeup, which I never did. I also didn't dye my hair or anything like that. Because of this, I received a lot of fraternal corrections, since I didn't fit the image of the model supernumerary. With all of this going on, it's only natural to wonder what exactly the true purpose of Opus Dei is. What do they promise to those who join? The goal, at least in theory, is to seek holiness through work and everyday life, and to bring as many souls as possible to God, or better yet, to Opus Dei, because I was no longer so sure about the God part. The teachings we received were much more focused on the founder, José María Escrivá de Balaguer. What he wrote, what he said, videos of his public talks, which we watched as if we were at the movies. They recommended, actually, they forced us, to read his books. They even had their own catechism, different from the official Catholic Church catechism. There were these so-called meetings, which were basically week-long retreats where we learned this exclusive Opus Dei catechism, along with other things about the founder and his ideas. And we weren't allowed to take any notes. Because of all this, I have no hesitation in calling Opus Dei a cult, and I don't say that lightly. The spiritual promise is extremely poor, but on the other hand, what they take from members financially is no small thing. Every member, even if married, was required to make monthly contributions to Opus Dei. It was a mandatory rule, and it couldn't be less than, say, 50 euros. Opus Dei ended up feeling like having an extra child, and honestly, it cost me more than all of my children combined. Everything had to be paid for, The retreats, the meetings, the donations for the Opus Dei chapels that were spreading all over the world. The only benefit of being a supernumerary was that at least we could still live outside the centers, in the real world. In other words, we could have a job and keep our paycheck. But things were much tougher for the numeraries because they had to hand over everything they earned to Opus Dei. And when a numerary decided to leave the organization, they left with nothing, absolutely nothing. Their bank account was emptied, and they even had to account for every penny they spent to the center they lived in. If they needed to buy something as simple as a pair of socks, for example, they had to ask for the money first, then show the receipt to prove the expense. They didn't even have the freedom to spend their own money because the truth was the money wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to Opus Dei. It was actually Opus Dei that stepped in to bail out the Vatican financially during the Ambrosiano bank scandal when the bank collapsed. They refilled the coffers. Not long after that, the founder was canonized. Everything seemed very well orchestrated and the money kept flowing, as long as it was going to them, of course. Because if you didn't pay what they demanded, they came after you relentlessly. It didn't matter if you had kids or if you were struggling financially. They would say, "You can pay in installments, but you have to pay." At no point would they lower the amount you owed. You might take longer to pay it off, but they would keep collecting until the debt was fully paid. But the worst part wasn't even the money. The worst part was the psychological treatment, the daily pressure, the emotional coldness, the complete disregard for other people's pain. I remember an experience that really left a mark on me. A friend of mine, who wasn't part of Opus Dei, spent the morning with me at my house. We had put our kids down for a nap, including my youngest daughter, who was still a baby. We went to the kitchen to prepare lunch, and when we finished, we went back to check on the babies. That's when she walked into the living room holding the baby in her arms, already dead. It was such a shock. We tried to revive the baby. We did chest compressions. We called an ambulance. Everything happened so fast since we were in Switzerland. I was completely devastated. That same week on Tuesday, I was supposed to go to the Circle meeting in Geneva. I called the person I usually carpooled with and said, "Look, I'm not in any condition to drive. I'm not okay. I just want to stay home." Not long after, I got a call from the center saying, "Veronique, you have to come. The way you're acting is not dignified." I ended up going, even though I was a wreck, my face all swollen from crying so much. And while I was there, I got a fraternal correction because they said I wasn't giving a good image of Opus Dei, that I was showing weakness, and that wasn't acceptable. Later on, I went to confession and told the priest what had happened, and instead of comforting me, he said, "Veronique, you're crawling in the mud." He also accused me of being too sensitive. On top of all that, there was domestic violence. When I wanted to leave Opus Dei, my ex-husband, who was already very abusive, forbid me from doing so. He was extremely aggressive, and I even told a priest from Opus Dei about it. His response was, "This is your cross. You must carry it without complaining, without saying a word." They knew exactly what was happening in my home and did absolutely nothing. For me, that's complete negligence, a criminal omission. But to them, it was all considered normal. Nobody lifted a finger. Besides all that, part of a member's mission in Opus Dei is proselytism. In other words, the duty to bring as many people as possible into the organization. But there's another way of recruiting that's even more effective, though slower and at the same time, much more twisted. Supernumeraries are encouraged to have large families. And what happens when both parents are members of Opus Dei? The kids end up becoming part of Opus Dei too. In other words, this creates a true breeding ground for future vocations. Many families connected to Opus Dei have very large families, 3, 4, 5, even 9 kids. I personally know a family with 16 children. These kids grow up fully immersed in activities organized by Opus Dei. They attend youth clubs. They watch their parents go to Mass every single day, because that's how it works. We take the kids to Mass every day. Later on, when they grow up, they often end up marrying other members of Opus Dei, becoming numeraries themselves, and the cycle keeps going, feeding itself. Starting as early as 7 or 8 years old, There are already little clubs for girls and boys, where the children begin to be prepared for that path. What's really concerning is that some things are kept from the parents. I've seen this happen many times. For example, when one of my son's friends was over at our house, I heard him say, "I'm not allowed to tell my parents about this," or "They told me I shouldn't say anything about this to them." They start early on to break family bonds, especially when they sense that the parents might not be fully on board with Opus Dei. So they start creating secrets, building walls, which eventually distance the kids from their own parents. In the end, Opus Dei offers a very empty spiritual promise, while keeping its bank accounts nice and full, all while maintaining strict control over the members' lives and minds. To me, Opus Dei checks every box of a cult, even if it isn't officially recognized as one, and the organization keeps publicly denying it. Ew. Compared to other stories, my exit from Opus Dei was actually relatively smooth, but what made me decide to leave? The realization that I needed to get out came pretty quickly, but the courage to actually leave only came after 13 years. When I finally stood my ground, they told me I was possessed by the devil, that I was Satan, that I was in mortal sin. And even worse, they spread that rumor to all of my friends. When I saw how they acted, I thought to myself, wow, I guess I wasn't so wrong after all. This really isn't right. That's when I made the decision to leave for good. But there was one problem. My husband at the time wouldn't even hear of me leaving, because it would be a huge embarrassment for him. Every time I tried to bring it up and told him I wasn't feeling well, that I didn't think I had a vocation, and that I'd rather just be a cooperator, the answer was always the same. That's Satan talking to you. You're listening to the devil. They use that tactic all the time. That's Satan. In 1996, I knew I was supposed to renew my commitment, like I did every year on March 19th, the feast of St. Joseph. But that year, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I went to a local parish and asked the priest, "Look, I'm part of Opus Dei, and I renew my commitment every year on March 19th. Am I allowed to leave this?" And he replied, "Of course, you're free to leave." That was it. I made my decision right then and there. March 19th came and went. It was almost midnight when the phone rang. It was the people from the Women's Center in Strasbourg saying, "Veronique, today is March 19th and you didn't call us." And I answered, "No, I really didn't call and I'm not going to." On the other end of the line, someone said, "What do you mean? We can talk about this, you know. Satan always tries to pull people away from the places where they're doing well." But I answered, "Enough. I've made my decision. I don't want to be part of Opus Dei anymore. This is not my path." About a month or two later, I ran into an old classmate who said to me, "Vero, I need to tell you something. Someone from Opus Dei showed up at my door to tell me I wasn't allowed to talk to you anymore because you had left Opus Dei and were now living in a state of mortal sin. They told me I needed to stay away from you." That really shocked me, and she went on to say that she wasn't the only one they had approached to spread that message. Sometime later, another friend told me she had gone to the Opus Dei Center and asked them to pray for me because I had gone through breast cancer. She said she asked them to pray for me, and their response was, "No, we don't pray for her." To them, leaving Opus Dei was the end. Instead of praying, their goal was to destroy me. That was when I knew for sure. You made the right choice walking away from this. Your instincts were right. This isn't for you. There's nothing pure about this. After 13 years in Opus Dei, living under total control, having my reports of domestic violence ignored, constantly being subjected to fraternal corrections, and having a good part of my money taken from me, I finally managed to leave. But they didn't give up so easily. They went after my friends, tried to isolate me, ruin my reputation, and break my personal connections. Even so, I can say my exit was relatively smooth. A few years later, I started writing about everything I had lived through. It felt good, like keeping a journal where I could let out my anger and emotions. At first, I wasn't planning to publish anything, It was just a way to vent. But then I realized, if this happened to me, it could have happened to other people too. That's when I thought about turning it into an article to give a voice to those who had gone through something similar. At first, it seemed like just a distant dream because I didn't know anyone in publishing and thought I'd never be able to publish a book. But little by little, I started meeting other people who had also left Opus Dei. I started learning more, doing research, and that's when a journalist reached out to me. She read one of my articles and, a few days later, told me, "Alban Mikkel Publishing is interested. Would you be open to writing a book?" And I immediately said yes, because by then, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about warning others. If someone has gone through something similar, they need the courage to speak up and not stay silent. Today, looking back, I don't carry hatred. I carry scars, some deep, others barely noticeable, but they all remind me of where God brought me from. It took me many years to fully break free from the guilt, manipulation, and fear that had been planted inside me. I had to relearn the meaning of words like love, freedom, and even God. But deep down, I know He never abandoned me. He was the one who held me up when I couldn't pray anymore. He was the one who patiently and mercifully led me out of that maze of man-made rules and forced silences. Today, I live a simple and genuine Christian faith. I no longer need intermediaries or heavy structures to connect with God. I found peace in reading His Word and in faith in Jesus Christ, pure, accessible, loving. He is my only Savior, my way, my truth, and my life. I no longer belong to any organization. Belonging to Christ is enough for me. And it's in that freedom that I've finally discovered true joy. God bless you all. And now that you've heard all of this, let me ask you, what have you been doing about your spiritual life? Have you been seeking a real relationship with God? Or are you still relying on human systems, rules, or traditions that control you more than they bring you closer to Christ? Are you living as someone who truly belongs to Jesus? Or are you still letting other voices define your spiritual identity? Can you recognize which environments or relationships have been pulling you away from the freedom that only exists in Christ? Don't ignore what God is speaking to you today. Take a moment to reflect. What needs to change in your life right now? What steps can you take today to break free from what's holding you back and start living a pure, true, and free faith? Write in the comments what touched you the most in this testimony and what decision you feel God is calling you to make from here on out. I'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to keep receiving content that helps you grow in your faith, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss anything. May God bless you and strengthen you on this journey.
About meeting Diddy. Well, the first time was definitely a dream come true. I remember him walking into the party and asking, "What kind of girls y'all want?" And just a few minutes later, a bunch of girls showed up. I think someone asked for Puerto Rican girls and a whole group of them just popped up out of nowhere. That was just one of many moments where I realized the kind of power he had. He could get whatever he wanted. There were times when I saw people doing spiritual sessions over my music. We'd all be in the studio, and it was almost like a ritual. We'd light candles, and while the beats were playing, people would wave their hands and start chanting different things over the music. The transition from the secular industry to the gospel scene, honestly, both industries are almost the same. You have to choose which side of the table you want to sit on.
If you felt moved by this testimony and want to watch this story and more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Here, we share powerful experiences that can transform lives and strengthen faith. Click the subscribe button, activate the notification bell to receive updates, and join our community of faith and hope.